Evening, folks. Old Buster coming to you there again. I just wanted to kind of tell you I got cleaned up Saturday night, #2 wash tub, and we ready and raring to go reading this story. First off, we want to say a little hello to old Jameson. He's a fan. He wants to be on the YouTube, and his mama works over at the hospital, so I told her, I said, you just grab little Jameson, bring him over here, and I'll put him on my knee, and we'll be on the YouTube. I appreciate all you folks listening, and the youngins as well, because these stories is for everybody, family-wise, you know. Then I just really have to say thank you to my lovely bride, Lulu. She does all the fetching and filming and doing every which thing, and takes care of old Buster pretty good. And then we got Miss Katie over at the hospital. Kind of took care of Buster this week when he was there for about 3 days. And I told her I'd say a big howdy to her too. And don't forget, you got KZIS at busterandtheboys.com. That's old Larry Simpson down there in Midlothian. And rest of our running crew, old Sonny Christopher, his real name Ebby Jack Condren. He's a country singer just like old Larry is. And of course Ronnie Collins, he's another country singer. Those boys are friends. And we sure don't want to forget old Howard. That's Doug Holmes. Doug Holmes Construction out of Lubbock, Texas. He's kind of a sponsor for us and always a rooting for us. Tell us another story. And of course we got Walter hiding out somewhere. He's a trickster. We don't know where he is. And Jesse Darrell's at the house not feeling too good. He's a little puny, but he loves his stories. Well, the story this week is called Piddling. So let's get on to it. Now, Walter, don't you are going to be messing with me up here on this here mountaintop. I'll wrestle with you when we get down from here. Just quit your pestering me, hollered Buster. Well, Walter is just plumb chock full of devilment and wasn't going to leave Buster alone for a minute. He wasn't going to pay no never mind to Buster talk. Well, Walter went to tackle Buster and get him watered up good in the snow, but Buster slung Walter off before he went down. Buster told Walter to leave him be, and he knowed Buster wasn't none too flexible, especially on this slickery ground they got there. Well, whilst Buster went figuring out which way they was going to get down from that mountaintop with an 18-foot Christmas tree, Walter snuck up behind Buster and took him down at the knees. Well, Buster went to caterwauling and went to grabbing for air when he went down. Well, Buster got a hold of a branch of the Christmas tree and a heck of a hank of hair of Walter's as he went over the side of the mountain. Well, Jesse and Howard was down at the bottom of the hill and seed it all. Now, just don't that beat all, exclaimed Howard. Them two is at it again. Lordy, Jesse, look what is a-coming at us. Well, now you never seed the side as was coming and rolling down out there hill. There was Buster and Walter and Christmas tree all rolled up into one big snowball, rolling down that hill 90 to nothing. Arms and legs and Christmas tree limbs was a-poking out everywhere, and a body never heard such a hollering and a squalling. Buster was a-hollering at Walter that he was going to skunt his and hay, and Walter was a-belly laughing so hard you could hear him a mile away. Well, Jesse and Howard skedaddled just in time when the whole dang conglomeration hit the haystack, and old man Rollins had put it up there before summer. Haying was over, and it was at the bottom of the hill. Well, the boys had them a few scratches, but the Christmas tree fared the worst. And boy, what didn't it, too? Limbs was busted and needles was drug off. That there tree looked like it got whooped with Grandma's rug beater and then some. Well, Jesse and Howard walked up to the boys and helped get them untangled, and Jesse told both of them that their maws and paws wasn't going to be none tore happy with that there tore up Christmas tree. Well, Buster said it was all Walter's fault, and if there never was a licking, it ought to be Walter getting it and not him. Well, it was now on supper time when the boys got on back to the house. The doings was at the Ollinger place that year, as Walter's pa had added on to the house with all the youngins he had. He had to have more room. Well, you know, all the boys had a bit more money nowadays, and so they helped their people. So all the families agreed to have Christmas there and get it all done and cooked up and ready to eat and have a big old time at the Ollinger place. Well, when the boys brung in that scraggly Christmas tree, everybody's jaw dropped and began to asking what in the world done happened to that tree. Well, you see, it was a mix-up of a mite, said Jesse. Well, now, Jesse ain't gonna tell no lie now. Y'all boys y'all all know that. Them boys don't do that. It was an awful slickery up there on the mountaintop, and Walter went to help Buster, and he was wrangling that tree, and Buster slipped and went down, and he grabbed a hold to Walter whilst he was trying to get his in balance, but they both went over the side of the mountain. They was real lucky they wasn't hurt bad as they rolled into the haystack at the bottom of the hill, and that saved their bacon and them from being hurt real bad. Well, Buster's grandma and Walter's ma went to examining them two boys and fretting over them something fierce like. Now the men folk raised an eyebrow and just didn't know if they needed to swallow that yarn or not, cause they knowed them boys. But they also know Jesse wasn't gonna lie none either. Well, Buster, Walter, and Hired all winked at Jesse as they went in to the supper table. Now Jesse didn't lie none, y'all know that, but he just didn't tell how Buster lost his in balance. Old Jesse got him out of that pickle for sure. Well, later on, Buster told Walter he was still going to get his and Hade's gun on both of them, and both of them went to laughing because one figured he could get the other into holler calf rope. That's a sight, I tell you, them two tussling. Well, after supper, Jesse gathered the boys around and said he done had him an idea. He done heard that some folks thrown out in the panhandle and some Okies that come through past his and Paul whilst he was working on the gas pipeline, that's for Sonat, Southern Natural Gas, said how they was a-hurting for water right smart and would give anything for a cup of cold water. Well, Jesse said, boys, let's side-fiddle on up to the old ice cave on the backside of Baldy Mountain and have a gander on my idea about making us some pocket change of selling water. Well, ain't nobody ever here to set your harebrained idea of selling water. Water was everywhere. Well, when you want to go up there, I asked Hired. Then we ain't got no learning at the schoolhouse for a spell, now on a fortnight. How about tomorrow morning, said Jesse. Well, all the boys, they gonna go along with it. So they did. Even though they didn't rightly cotton to the idea about people buying no water. All my wood is laid by, said Buster, and Hired said everything was froze over, and his and Pa was just a-waiting for a thaw to get on back to work. Well, Walter said how he had to feed the stock and do a few chores, so why didn't they all meet up in the morning and help him out, and then they could get gone quicker. Well, all the boys agreed to that, and Jesse told them what all he wanted them to bring for the trip. Well, the boys decided to camp out for a few days and even do some hunting too, and got the permission from all their folks to be gone for the weekend. The boys' ma's and pa's all had something to say about how long they could be gone, that's for sure, and figured 3 days was about the most they could be gone and not hardship the families with their chores, and there was church on Sunday too, you know. Now, Miss Sarah Jesse's ma was sure enough set out on that along with Mrs. Ollinger. Now, Hired's ma and Buster's grandma would get a willer switch after both of them if Hired and Buster wasn't at Sunday school at the Baptist church and Buster wasn't at the First Christian Church first thing on Sunday morning. Of course, they done been in a pickle over that before, you know, so them boys had to straighten up. Sunday was to be a family dinner. Buster saying as Buster's mama was getting off at the airport for the weekend and coming to see Buster, and of course his grandma and grandpa, that's her mom and daddy. Well, Buster's ma worked for the army and the government mostly, just let folks off on Sunday, but she got the whole weekend off because of repairs on the runway and such. Well, it was awful hard for Buster's mama to get back home, especially when it rained. Them old gumbo and buckshot roads with a quagmire, and the bus wasn't going to even try to make it down Central Road back then. A body couldn't even walk in that stuff. It'd ball up something fierce and bog them down pretty near the spring. Just weren't any reliable transportation before the Blue Rock Road now. Well, anyhow, Buster wasn't going to miss seeing his and Mama, that's for sure. He dearly loved her, and if there's a saint that ever walked this earth, it's his Mama. Well, the next morning after helping Walter feed the stock and do his chores, the boys lit on out. They had their camping supplies and the tools Jesse wanted them to bring along. Well, Buster's grandpa let him take the wagon and the mules because there wasn't no vehicle going to go up Baldy Mountain, that's for sure. Well, Buster knowed them mules since they was colts and know what they could and would do. More than that, what they were capable of doing. Well, Jesse had the boys to gather up every keg and barrel and jug and jar along with some picks and shovels and croaker sacks. Baling twine was always a right smart thing to have as well. Well, sir, with all them supplies, two of the boys, namely Walter and Hired, had to ride the mules because there weren't enough room in the wagon for them all. Well, Jesse rode on the wagon seat whilst Buster drove the team. Well, it took the boys most of the morning to get on up Baldy to the ice cave, and then they set up camp before Jesse and the boys had time to even say much about it, and told them to follow him on into the ice cave. Jesse said, "Boys, this here is your ticket for the future." "Well, it's colder than a well digger in Idaho in this cave, so what are we looking at?" Jesse said, Walter. Jesse said, "Boys, this here ice will make water as pure as the driven snow when we melt it. We're going to sell water." Now, the boys always went along with Jesse and his money-making scheme, but Hired said ain't nobody going to buy no water. That ain't never been done. "Well, I'd bet my bottom dollar on it," says Jesse. "If we can make a few dollars to expand, them folks back east and them Okies in the Dust Bowl heading out to California will spy all we can supply, as well as who knows who is wanting pure, cold, sweet water. It'll take a mite of work, but we can do it," said Jesse, "and like I say, I'll bet my bottom dollar on it." Now, you boys with me? Well, to a man, they all agreed to do what it took to make go of the water business, but that didn't mean that there wasn't some chewing the rag over it now. Ain't nobody ever here to buy no water. Buster hollered over to Hired to hand him his pickaxe so he could begin to digging out chunks of ice. Walter jumped in with Buster, for them two could outwork 10 men, Jesse said, and Hired went to fetch all the barrels and such to begin to load up the ice. Now, Jesse told the boys to fill the barrels and put them in the entrance of the cave where the temperature was just high enough to melt the ice. Then they could turn on the spigot and fill all the jugs and jars and such. When all the water filled up the small kegs, jugs, and jars, the boys would wrap them up in the burlap croaker sacks and pack them in ice. After that was done, the barrels would be filled with ice so they could take as much ice and water as the wagon would hold back onto the house. Leastways, that was the plan. Well, all went pretty fast except in the melting, so the boys had some time to kill before they had to be back on Saturday night. Buster seed him an eagle's nest with some feathers he just had to have, so he clumb up the side of Baldy to get him some. Buster said them feathers was good luck. Well, about that time, as Buster was coming down, Hired done seen a baby mountain goat stuck on the side of old Baldy, about where Buster was, and hollered to Buster to wait on it, and he's going to go get that baby goat. The little feller didn't seem too scared, but Hired was bound and determined and fit to be tied to get that baby mountain goat. Well, just about that time, Hired got to where Buster was and the baby goat. Buster sneezed from all them feathers. Well, that done it. It plumb scared that baby goat, and Hired went a-grabbing for it, and Buster a-grabbing for Hired. Now, if that weren't problem enough, a mountain cat was stalking the baby goat for a meal. It was plumb comical to see Buster, Hired, baby goat, and cougar all falling into a snowbank. They was lucky none of them got hurt, and baby goat lit out to his and mama, and the cat hightailed it out of there too. Walter and Jesse run over to help Buster and Hired out the snowbank, and that's when the fat got to the fire. All that carrying on started an avalanche, and right then and there they all went down the mountainside lickety-split. There was an outcropping before they all went over the side of the mountain into the gorge 1,000 foot down at least. Buster grabbed a hold of a scrub bull pine, and Hired and Walter each grabbed a leg, and that just happened to belong to Buster, and that kept 3 of them from falling into outcropping or all the way down. Now, Jesse didn't fare too well. He went over the side. The boys was digging out and checking on each other, but just couldn't find Jesse. They all thought he was a goner for sure. All of them was hollering for Jesse, and finally they heard him down below. He was caught up on the outcropping ledge and was stuck in betwixt 2 big boulders. Buster said he was going after Jesse, and for Walter and Hired to hate on back to the wagon at camp and gather up all the rope they could find. When Hired and Walter got back with that rope they had, it just wasn't enough to get to Jesse to haul him out of there. Now, Buster sent Hired back to camp, told him to get all the reins off of the team plus the baling twine. Well, Hired heard as fast as he could, was back quicker than greased lightning. Buster had Walter braiding the leather reins along with the baling twine to make a rope longer and stronger so they could get Jesse up. Buster could see that Jesse was pretty much okay for wear and tear, but his leg was caught in betwixt them two big boulders. Now, Jesse, being slight and all, kept him from going over the cliff, but being caught up in his leg betwixt them two big rocks. Been any of the other boys, they'd have been goners for sure, because they just wouldn't have fit there. Well, Buster was able to climb down to Jesse, but sure enough couldn't get back up without a rope. Jesse never did like the cold so much, and he was plumb frizzle-lated by the time Buster got there. Whilst Buster was waiting for Walter to braid up the reins and baling wire, Hired Run got the team and some blankets. Well, Buster took off of his coat and covered up Jesse as best as he could and snuggled up close and personal-like. Buster was a-grinning like a possum eating green persimmons when he said to Jesse he just might kiss his in old hay. Now, Jesse was real serious-like when he said he ain't like Walter nor even Hired, so don't get him fractious. Oh me, what a mess. Any kissing to be done, he'd get that little gal that leaks the soda fountain at the barn dance next Saturday night. Them pheromones of him never let him down, 'cause they was a-coming. All the gals. Well, all the boys was a-funning each other, but that dang Walter was always up to something, and the worst of the bunch. Well, Jesse sure was a-shivering when the blankets was lowered down to Buster. It was a godsend, though. After getting Jesse as warm and cozy as best he could, Buster went to trying to get Jesse's leg out from betwixt them two big boulders. Stout as he was, Buster couldn't budge them rocks near a bit. Buster hollered to the boys and told them to cut him a sapling so he could get some leverage to move one of them rocks a bit. Walter chopped the sapling real fast and lowered it to Buster, and he done his best to move one of them rocks, but didn't have no luck at all. Wouldn't budge an inch. It was getting on towards dark, and a storm was a-brewing, and it looked to be a humdinger. Well, Hired told Buster they didn't have long to get Jesse loose, or they was going to be in a fight for their life. Buster had him to lower him a pick and a sledgehammer, and he went to work on them rocks like hellfire and brimstone was a-coming, which it was. Finally, Buster hollered up to Walter and Jesse and told them he had a plan. Now, Hired had to stay up top, and Walter had to come on down to him. There was a steel tamping rod in the back of the wagon, and Walter was going to need that too. Bring it with him. Buster told Hired to hitch his and Mule Sally, that was the one with the blaze, to lower Walter, as it was a lot quicker than climbing down. Now, Walter wasn't none too scared of heights, you know. Fact is, he plumb liked them. So hanging out there in space was pure fun to him. Well, Buster was glad of that, because he didn't like them none at all, and the space they was working on couldn't have been more than 5 foot wide. How them two big boulders stayed up there was a mystery to Buster. Walter got down to the ledge and began to help digging around the rocks when he seen something he didn't like none at all. Buster wasn't able to see the cracks, so he didn't know how bad the situation was. Walter got Buster and whispered into his ear about the trouble they was in. Buster about turned green when he heard that, I'm telling you. So he got down by Jesse with Walter and told him of the fix they was in, but he had a plan. Jesse told Buster to do what he had to, even if he had to chop off his leg. Now, there ain't going to be no leg chopping, Buster said. You hear me, Jesse? Get that ID plumb out of your head right now. Winds is going to make us, so just hang on. Buster hollered up to Hired to go get his another mule, Ned, and be quick about it. Now, Ned was the stronger of the two mules, but Sally was more even-tempered and gentle, you know. Now, everybody that works horses, mules, cattle, about any kind of stock knows that sooner or later they's going to hurt you whether they mean to or not. So Buster told Hired to be careful with them mules. Buster told Hired to bring a couple of sugar cubes and apples when he come back from camp with Ned. The storm hit, but wasn't full force yet when Buster told Walter to dig in. Come hell in the high water, they didn't have no more time to waste to getting Jesse free now. It had to be done. What they was going to do is put the tamping bar and sapling opposite each other and pry them rocks apart with Ned's help. When one of them boulders moved, and Buster figured it would be the one he was working on, the whole dang ledge was going to break off, so everything had to go right as rain, or they was just plumb barbecued. Buster tied the strongest rope around the rock he was working on and took the side of the ledge that was going to break off first. Whilst they was getting ready on the ledge, Hired had Ned hitched up so's to pull that rock, and Sally hitched up to pull the boys. Well, Buster told Hired to throw out one of the apples and sugar cubes in front of Sally, and she'd pull on her own till he hollered, "Whoa!" Now, Ned, on the other hand, was another matter. When Ned seed Sally a-going for her apple and sugar cube, he would light out after it too. He was bound and determined to be there first, so pulling hard wasn't going to be no problem for him. But with the rock tied to him and going over the ledge, it'd pull Ned down to the gorge, and he'd be killed later than a doornail. Buster knowed Hired was quick as a cat, so he told him to cut the rope when the boulder started moving. Buster was going to tie Jesse and Walter to Sally, and she'd pull them up. Buster hollered to Walter over the howling wind and blowing snow to put his back into it now. They had only this one chance, or they'd be pushing up daisies for sure. Buster hollered, "Now!" And both them boys heaved on them rocks and pried them up, and Ned pulled the rock that Buster was working on plumb off of the ledge. When the rock began to move, Hired chunked the apples and sugar cubes out in front of Sally, and she took on out after them and pulled Jesse and Walter up onto safe ground. The thing was, they all forgot about Buster. When Hired went to cut the rope on Ned, there weren't no Ned. He done lit out after Sally. Well, there wasn't no time for Hired to cut the rope. When the boulder went over the side, Buster had just cut the rope on Ned and grabbed a hold of the rope himself. Buster knowed he'd be skun up some with Ned a-pulling and running after Sally and them apples and sugar cubes, so he was ready for it. Well, Buster come a-sailing over the cliff and landed in the snowbank that was soft as his grandma's feather bed. Well, boys done thought Buster was a goner and was plumb beside theirselves when Buster come up a spitting and sputtering snow. Well, all the boys got back to camp with the mules and tools, and sure enough had a snort of old McBrayer. Figured they earned it. Jesse's leg was only a bit bruised, but otherwise he as fit as a fiddle. Walter said he had a grand old time while Sally was pulling him up, but Hired was a bit off in his feet. Hired said, "Buster, you made sure Jesse and Walter and even the mules would make it, but not you, didn't you?" Well, Buster said he figured he would make it and everything work out all right. Well, all three of them looked at Buster and said, "You done saved our lives." "It was just a chore that had to be done," Buster said. "Now give me a swig of that there liquor." Ain't nothing like that old McBrayer now. After some supper and a few snorts, the boys turned in. Well, round about daylight, Jesse grabbed a hold of Buster's head and smacked a big old kiss on the top of his head. Then Walter headlocked him and kissed Buster's head too, and then Hired done the same. They all said they was brothers and 'tweren't no bond stronger than theirs. Buster hollered, "Turn me loose, Walter," and they all went to laughing. Well, the boys packed up their water and ice barrels and gear and headed on back home. They done been on a hair-raising adventure and knowed there was more to come. Well, Buster visited with his ma, which he loved dearly, on Sunday, and the boys come by for pie that evening. Well, Jesse allowed on Monday they'd begin to selling water at the intersection of both of the main roads into town. By noon, they was plumb out of water and had orders from half a dozen stores on the main route to California. Old Route 66 is called. Well, each one of the boys took home two $20 gold pieces for their trouble. Well, as the boys growed up and had many more adventures and business ventures, the Baldy Mountain Water Company was the cornerstone of their business, and it was an empire later on. Baldy Mountain water was knowed and drank round the world. Lots of others tried to be better than Baldy Mountain water, but just couldn't get there. Old Baldy Mountain water was purer and sweeter than any other water a body could buy. Jesse was right. Selling water did make them a pocket full of change. Hold the line, boys, hold the line.